Alrighty, it is, got my thing on here. Okay, it is June the 12th, 2025, and this is the meeting of the South Kingstown Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee. We'll have a call to order and a roll call. Lisa Beth
Sanford.
Here. Neil Murray.
Neil Murray.
And Josh Saunders.
And I'm Dorothy Hill. Okay, and did everybody get a chance to take a look at the minutes that can vote on them? So Josh?
Do you have a copy of them? I think I did see them on my email. I just want a physical copy.
Lisa Beth did a great job capturing what the Green Hill representatives, what their comments were.
Yeah, all good here.
Okay, does somebody want to make a motion to approve the minutes?
A second.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, and,
A second.
okay, any discussion? No discussion, all in favor of passing them?
Yes, approved.
All right. Okay, so it's unanimous. All righty, and so for correspondence and public comment, we had a very nice group of folks from Green Hill Beach Road last month, and we composed a letter to the town council, and it was on their June 9th agenda. I was not able to attend. I don't know what the outcome is at this point. Luke, can you let us know?
Okay. So we did not get to that portion of the meeting. The meeting ran past 11. The council voted to only entertain one item past that, which was critical for purchasing, and then they terminated the meeting. So we didn't get to it. So I'm glad you didn't attend. You have been waiting and been disappointed. There was an individual from Green Hill, though, who did attend, unfortunately did wait and was not able to speak. So the town manager spoke with that individual directly, apologized for the inconvenience. We are having another meeting on Monday, a special meeting coming up to address the last items that we didn't get to. And I believe, I will confirm in a second, but I did receive an email today with the agenda, and I believe it does have the communication on it for Green Hill. I don't know if it includes your specific communication, but let me check real quick, okay?
Okay, and if I can't make it, then maybe somebody else from the committee would, so we'll just pass that along. Okay, so Lisa Beth and I attended the state's long-range transportation plan public forum at North Kingstown Free Library on I guess it was last week. And so I think that what we saw was that there was this is just a policy document. They don't get down to the specifics, but I think, and this will come up later in the meeting. But I think that one of the things that kind of rises to this level for the long-range plan is maybe a crossing from north to south on Route 1. So that's going to come up a little bit later in the meeting, but I think that that might rise to the occasion, and we can talk about it later on to see if that's something that we want to do. And so there is still time to comment on the plan, and I shared it with you guys. It's in our Google reference docs, so if anybody wants to take a look at it, and if there's anything that you see that you want to comment on, Liza Farr is very open to hearing from us. She also had said that, and I communicated this with Luke, because I asked, well, how do you compile it? And so in addition to the each community's community comprehensive plan that is submitted, whatever else the town has, whatever other plans they have, we can submit those for them to consider. So I don't know if it's appropriate, Luke, for us to share with someone, if you want to just let me know what you think.
So just to clarify, so it would be through the BPAC we'd be submitting town documents, or what's the?
Yeah, I didn't think it was appropriate for us to submit them.
Sure.
So I'm just saying that if it's something that the long-range planners could use, like maybe the Old Tower Hill neighborhood plan, because it does, that is something that's probably years and years down the road, but it's in their zone of, they have two state roads that intersect right there. So if you think that that's something that they can use, they were very interested in, like the village studies, just our policy documents. And I mentioned the bike pedestrian master plan, which I know was not approved by the town, but it was acknowledged. So if it's something, she was interested in that. So if I can send that to her, but I don't feel comfortable sending any of the other documents from the town.
Yeah, I think any of the town council approved indoctrinated, the documents that we have, this planning documents should be coming directly from the town. Typically, we'd get a request directly from the agency. It's odd that they didn't request it, but that's fine. There's a lot going on. They work with a lot of other communities. I appreciate you bringing it to my attention. I did have your email on this, so I think what I will do is if you could just follow up with me directly. We'll chat a little bit further about it, get a list of, I know you had listed out some of the documents, make sure, and then I'll get the information to staff in the planning department and ask them to communicate directly, and I'll make an introduction email with you on it, acknowledging the fact that you've brought this to our attention. We're glad to collaborate. I'm including planning staff on this email. They'll provide the following documents. Please advise if you need any more. So I appreciate you bringing it to us, and I'll make sure it gets done, and I'll include you on it, so that way, since you're the front runner of bringing this to our attention, I'll make sure you stay on the loop on it.
Okay, and there's also going to be I guess there's going to be a STIP public forum at some point, and we just don't know what the date is for that. You and I talked about maybe going to that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I remember that.
Okay. All righty, and then I attended Strong Towns Gathering in Providence. Charles Mayron, excellent. So anyway, it was a great conference, and it was just nice to get around some folks that have similar feelings. Nice to be around the peeps, All right. Also, I just wanted to make sure we all work, pretty hard for this group, and I just wanted to make sure that everybody felt comfortable and that they felt like they were being heard with whatever suggestions or comments, and not that I'm spending all the time talking. So if anybody else has anything that they want to bring up that has to do with, any correspondence or public comment, folks that they've talked to around town, or communications that they've had with the town, please feel free to bring that up.
After being away for about a month and a half, I've had no communications, but intend to pick up during the summer. And as was discussed on a message you sent to me last one, I'll work on some of the correspondence for the organization.
Okay, that sounds great. All righty. Okay, so staff report on town activities. Luke.
Where to begin? All right, so the most important BPAC-related items by far is the Safe Streets for All grant and the Route 138 reconstruction. So I'll go through those and kind of where we're at. Safe Streets for All, the council agreed in our last council session to approve the Safe Streets for All action plan. So that means they adopted the plan and made that, I brought that to council. Eric Weiss spoke, gave an overview, and the council formally adopted the plan, which was still in draft form. I still haven't received the final form. It was mostly ADA access type stuff. It was minor adjustments. It wasn't substantial enhancements to the document. That was my understanding. In addition, I asked for two things. One, a resolution supporting a grant submission to the federal government for a Safe Streets for All implementation grant specific to Main Street. That is what we feel is going to be the highest probable of funding for the federal government. We have economic development there in addition to other. Unfortunately, the current administration isn't as, I would say, probably pedestrian friendly as they once were. So we were actually encouraged to kind of tone down that aspect of it and kind of push up the economic development sort of interconnectivity of town spaces and things like that. It kind of is what it is. We're going to play the game best we can. That does not mean we're going to exclude any bike pedestrian access or improvements from the plan. It just means that we have to, pivot accordingly to make an application that's strong. The third thing I did was I asked for approval to bring Bowman on board to prepare the grant application. The grant procedure is pretty extensive. We have limited staff, including myself, who's also dealing with a number of projects coming out of the ARPA funding that we're still dealing with. So I asked for them to provide a proposal. I happen to know, I live in Coventry. I happen to be at a meeting a few nights, before, and Bowman was there presenting, and they were also hired to do an action grant. Theirs is more geared towards school zones. But Bowman has the experience in the engineering to help, support the grant, and Eric obviously knows our Safe Streets plan. So the town agreed to award a contract not to exceed $15,000 to have them prepare the application, and they're moving forward with that, and I've been collaborating with them based on their guidance. Whatever they need, we're trying to supply, including the RSA, which we'll talk about tonight for the Main Street. And that's roadway safety assessment. So I'm using acronyms again. Yep. So that's positive. Where the grant submission deadline is June 26th. That will occur when I'm actually out of town. I'm going to take a vacation with my family. They're continuing on next week. I'm going to be focused on making sure they have everything they need, including letters of support. You have a question?
Is that for the grant or is that for the RSA?
That is for the grant. So the grant submission deadline is the June 26th. So, and that's a deadline, right? But of course, like every good grant, you got to give it in the day of, right? So ideally, we'll get it in earlier, but I'm working on getting letters of support, and that is one thing I'd ask of this group, is a letter of support. And I'm not going to control what how you want to phrase that letter. I think, suggested is, the fact that Main Street needs an upgrade, and the fact that it does support economic development and intermodal connectivity and things like that. But I think as a kind of grassroots group, we'd love to include that in our package. We're getting letters of support from some of our elected leadership as well. And then we're going to try to make as strong a package as we can. So that's where we're at. They're moving along. Any questions on the Safe Streets for All grant?
Well, yes, I have. Now, when the letter of support is written, is it in support of the plan or in support of the request?
It's in support of the specific implementation request for the reconstruction of Main Street. So what I'll do is, actually tomorrow, surprisingly, I have a pretty good just open work day. My goal is to create a template for you.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to take it, but at least get you started and get you some verbiage to where, and I'll run it by Eric as well, making sure that it kind of fits with, because I wanted to talk to what we're actually submitting, right? It should be in context with our plan, shouldn't speak to something totally different. So that way you have a template. Feel free to amend it as you see fit, and then just send it on back, and we'll include it in our package.
All right. Have you also asked the Chamber of Commerce for a letter of support, or?
Not yet, but I plan to. I'm going to be doing the same thing for them. So I'm going to create a general template that I'll send to them. I work pretty closely these days with the Wakefield Village Association, so we'll get one from them. EDC would be another important group, so we're looking for them because there is a pretty strong economic development component. And then we'll be looking for whoever we can get, really. I mean, I'm more than glad to take whatever letters of support to support the application.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
So for the, I'm sorry.
So a takeaway in the minutes would be that I'll work with him to draft and submit the letter. Once I do submit it, I will copy all the members on BPAC as to what has gone in.
Eric, you're welcome to join us, and you're welcome to participate and add anything any way you want to, okay? Because we've had lots of, and I should have invited you up earlier, but this is new for us. This kind of formality. We're usually in the conference room, and just so it seems a little bit more formal, but we're trying to forget that it's a little bit more formal.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And this is, and for somebody like myself, it's kind of uncomfortable to make sure that everything is so neat and organized. and without everybody going, hey, what about?
I'd just be interested to understand what you
That took,
Right, right, yeah.
that took over 6 years.
That was, yeah,
That
that
was
was,
a very long time, and we switched council members. So that's, you had the difference between,
I'm sorry, but can you use the mic? Just so people on video? Yeah, okay, if it's, just so if anybody watches the meeting, they'll know what's going on. Sorry to be a stickler.
That's fine, okay. Anyway, all right, I did have a question on Safe Streets for All. No problem. So we have this document. It shows a number of different treatments for different areas in town. And even though you're not asking for an implementation grant for everything, on, like, say, Saw Pond Road, where DPS is just doing this repaving, will they be using whatever Safe Streets for All treatment says on that one corner? There was some information there for a crosswalk or a sign that was different than what was there before. So if there is any new, or road maintenance project or something new, will we be following the recommendations for Safe Streets for All, even if we don't need an implementation grant? I mean, we're just talking about a crosswalk and some signs. Will we be doing that, or is there another process that has to happen in order for DPS to adopt that?
So it's a good question. My shorter answer is we haven't gotten there yet because the plan is new. But my intent as deputy town manager is to meet with Rich, the DPS director, and to see how we can integrate those recommendations into the capital plan as we do street improvements. Because I think the benefit of this whole process, right, beyond the implementation grant, right, hopefully we get something, we may not, but we really have some very, very specific actions based on data now, right? They did a great job extracting data from the state that the state never usually gives up. Crash data, they don't just give that out. And it was tough to even get that to our own staff. So I think we have a really solid plan now, because you have like comprehensive plan, which is very sort of high level. And then, you had a master plan, but again, that's another very high level. This is a recommended, like, this intersection should have this treatment, which is very attainable, barring, that we can get the money to do it. So I think the discussion with Rich is, how do we use this plan as kind of the template moving forward to implement these recommendations when we have the chance, and looking at the 6-year capital plan and saying, how do these weave into that, and what's the cost implications? So I guess the short answer is yes, I envision these to be useful, and if they're on town roads, the hope is to implement them as we go, as long as the council supports it. And I would say that as those come up, this group would be advisory to council and supporting that. I would see that as their role, should you choose, to say, that plan gives you something to say, the plan says this, you have a capital expenditure plan to repave a roadway. We'd like to see this Safe Streets for All recommendation strategies implemented, because we're glad to do it, we just need to have the funding to do it. On state roads, much more complicated. What the Safe Streets does is it allows us, and I'll get into this a little bit more in the context of 138, but remind DOT that we have this plan, it is rooted in data, it was prepared by the state in collaboration with the municipality, and we feel there is an obligation to also follow that plan and to adhere to many of those recommendations. So I think there's a lot of value in that document. We're still kind of untethering like how we use that to our advantage, whether it's internal or external. Is that a clear enough answer?
Perfect.
Okay.
We'll talk with the 138, because there are a number of treatments that are mentioned in Safe Streets for All that are on 138. So when that comes up.
Based on what you just said, though, it was a when able to. Should we also write a letter of support to the town council to have it considered in all town roads, that when there is an improvement done, the Safe Streets for All pedestrian and bicycle safety features be shown specifically to have been considered in any work that's done?
So I can't tell you whether you should or shouldn't. What I can tell you is I would consider that within your scope of being an advisory to council, of writing a letter to them saying that you support that, you know, these measures outlined in the plan be integrated into the capital plan and into the work of the town or into the work of the state as projects get reviewed. So I think that's fully within your purview, and if you choose to do that, that's fine.
Would you agree that we proceed with that?
I would, and I think that later, I think, you know, when we get to some old business, I think that's going to come up again. So, because we are going to talk about just kind of wrapping up capital improvement, and so as we look to the next years, I think that that's, you know, that's a good segue.
Yeah, my concern is, or my thoughts are, when we requested for the green and complete streets to become, for the town to consider green and complete streets for when there's any maintenance or projects coming up. I know that Safe Streets for All is very, very close to it, but what are the main components that are different between those two? What might we be gaining or losing by not doing green and complete streets versus Safe Streets for All? And I'm sorry if I'm holding on to that a great deal.
So I look at it as very different documents, right? You know, this was and I applaud the work that the BPAC did, but the volume of data and GIS work that Bowman was able to do with $5 million in the contract, you know, that was a total contract, but we were a piece of that, was much more substantial. It's rooted in crash data, and it's going to have sign off of the federal government because they've essentially sponsored the plan. And it also makes us eligible for other funding opportunities. So I'm not trying to downgrade the green and complete streets plan that this group came up with, but I do think that that's going to be seen as probably, and it was council endorsed, right? They just endorsed that plan, which the master plan never was. So by endorsing that plan, you have the advantage of saying, okay, the council endorsed this. And so what does that mean? That means you agree with what's in the plan, and therefore, what are you going to do about it? So you're going to make recommendations to the council. It's their decision on whether they take up that advice or not. There's times they want to talk to you things about, and there are times they won't. There's a couple advocates I know out there who are more keen on, bicycle pedestrian issues, so they may take up the issue. All you can do is bring it to the table for consideration, right? They can also refer it to staff, in which case I'm already telling you from the other end, I think we're going to continue to work in that, and I'm making that commitment, but certainly make the advisory to council. That is part of your job, right? So I encourage it.
Thank you for that, because I know that it is the teeth in the Safe Streets for All at this time point that we need to take advantage of. So that's the biggest thing in my mind. Thanks.
Any other questions on Safe Streets? Okay. Is it okay if I go on to 138? Okay. So I just wanted to inform you where we're at on the 138 reconstruction plan. Just to remind you, we were contacted, I believe it was in March, with a general heads up that RIDOT was moving pretty quickly towards a reconstruction plan for 138. I didn't get a lot of details on why. I don't know if money was shifted and it became a priority because of, who knows. I have a feeling it also had to do with the bridge. The Amtrak bridge. It's difficult to reconstruct those bridges, and I know that when you do the bridges, typically they try to now align it with the roadway, so everything's getting done in sequence, and then when it's done, it's done. So we had a follow-up meeting in May to discuss the plan. We communicated some of our concerns. I had committed to writing a memo, communicating with staff and following up, and I believe that's kind of where we left it, and I want to give you the last update. I've been working on that memo. I need to get it out. That's part of what my tomorrow's committed to. I need to get it out by Monday to get it to RIDOT. I'm glad to review. I'll bring up the plan, and what I'd like to do, with your permission, is kind of go through some of the things that I'm identifying in the memorandum, and then if you have anything that you feel I'm leaving out, I'd rather just do it tonight instead of, now my recommendation is this, though. I'll send the memo, but it would be, and I'll share the memo with you, but what would be nice is if you sent a separate letter to RIDOT, separate from us, and not included in our package. Because I think it's important that they know that we have a community voice here that appreciates these issues and wants to chime in. So not hearing it from the same, like me, again, as part of a package, they're hearing it from the chair of the BPAC, right? And potentially others, because there may be things in that plan that they don't want to do. My experience with RIDOT, and they're usually pretty good to work with, but they have funding limitations too. However, often they can work things in the projects if there's enough pressure, and it's like anything else. So I think that would be a good strategy. We'll make our staff recommendations, but have you kind of chime in separately. I'll bring up the 138, Dorothy.
I just, that's a little bit of a, and we're happy to do that. I just want to, usually we go through, we send it through you or with your okay, and then, or, with the town council. And so we're happy to do that. I think that we are going to need a little bit of time to work on that, collaborate on that.
Sure.
So I don't know if that's something that maybe a couple of people can work on outside of a meeting, or if we need to call a separate meeting.
That's completely up to you.
Okay.
Just trying to think through this. So you are correct. Like, typically, if you're going to send like just a general correspondence to somebody and like unilaterally, yes, I'd like to know, because if we're not in the know, all of a sudden comes our way, and it's kind of discourteous to us because we don't, we get blindsided. In this case, we're initiating it, and I'm asking you. I'm not saying you have to. You could certainly go to council and ask, but council has already tasked us, in this role to coordinate with the state. So this is something that I would say, by nature of us having to do this at the behest of council as part of our job, certainly falls within your purview. I'm asking, you don't have to do it, but I think it would be beneficial. As far as timing, they are trying to get a design done by the end of the month for the RFP. So what does that mean? They're doing a design build project. So what they're doing is putting out like an RFQ with a schematic design, saying, here's the roadway, here's our prospective components to what we're doing. We need a team to come in and essentially put together the engineers and everyone else to do it along with the builder, and we're going to do this as a design build type project. So it's a pretty extensive review process. If you saw the Washington Bridge, that's a similar type process where they went out and got design build. It can take 8 to 10 months or more. I think they were talking by the end of the year, the calendar year, that they would be, getting close to selection. So by the turn of the year, so so I guess I correct myself. It's more of a 6 to 8 month process of selection. They'll select the design build team, and then they'll say go. So that when I say timing, they're not going to get the details of that plan for a while, right? They're just trying to give enough of a scope to somebody to say, all right, we think we can do this project and come in and tackle it all. So don't feel like this is something that has to be done by the end of the month. I want to get our initial memo in to put our foot in the door on the schematic design. That's why I want to review it with tonight to ensure we're all on the same page and I'm not leaving anything out. The memo is really what we're kind of getting our foot in the door. You're the back end support to kind of give it the shove, to help that out. Does that make sense?
So this letter would be requested for anywhere 2 to 3 months from now?
Yeah, I would say that would work. What I would say, that's ideally the max time frame.
Okay.
And I'd like to get it no more than 3
Before
months out.
September?
Yes.
Okay. Great.
So I just wanted to ask a question of Luke, just to kind of clarify. Maybe I'm getting in the weeds a little bit too much on the 138, but so you were saying that they're going to design, they're going to put it out, design, build, right? And that they're going to work towards a point of getting it to not quite final yet, but to a point where they can get it out on the street. Is that
Correct.
fair?
Yeah, so you have to give them the vision of what you're actually designing. right?
So is it going to be then, is it a progressive design build? Is that what it's going to be? So they'll put something out at like 30%? And then
Yes.
you kind of talk about it, figure it out, and they can start getting the cost together and then move it to a 60 or 90?
Yeah, I'm not even sure. I have to go back to their process, but they're not even really getting into, I think they get enough to know generally a project budget where they're gonna generally fall, enough of a schematic design, to your point, like maybe 20 to 30%, where there's a lot to be done.
Yeah.
But you understand the scope of the project.
Yeah.
So somebody can reasonably submit and say, we can take on the project, we have the skills and labor to do it. And, they're gonna come in kind of like more of a qualifications-based process. That's my understanding of it, rather than, like we're doing with the school, that's a gross maximum price. That's different, that's somebody saying, we'll do it for X. Here's our qualifications and why we should be able to undertake this project.
Right. Okay. And then would there be steps within that process for, organizations such as BBAC to come in and sort of, look to see how, whether it be Safe Streets or whether it be whatever, to come in and talk and be part of that sort of movement from 30 to 60 or whatever it may be?
So we hope so. We don't control the process as a town, and so that's why I would rather be proactive. Like to be honest, during our meeting, we felt a little bit like this is happening, we're moving in this direction, where do you want the sidewalk? Right, that was kind of like the tone of the meeting, not, hey, let's talk about the design. It was like, there's a couple elements we want to talk about. One was public safety, like how are we gonna make sure ambulances can be on the side of the bridge? So if somebody has a medical issue and the bridge is cut off, or how are we working that out? And then the second thing was, basically we had a discussion about the sidewalk. And if I recall correctly, Ken Burke was on that meeting. There's sometimes they're collaborative, sometimes they're not as much. So and my hope is that they will have points in the process to get both town input. And then if they're not inviting community partners to the table, I'm going to try my best to do this, which is kind of bring it in the back end, loop you in, let you know what's going on, so you can provide kind of a unilateral advisory directly to them. And whether that's effective or not, I don't know, but I will try every angle we can to get the most out of the project.
Right. Okay. No, that's great. Thank you.
Yep.
That we could collaborate outside this meeting, like maybe on a Google Doc together?
So you're not supposed to be collaborating as a group. You had mentioned maybe, a couple individuals. But you could certainly have us, dedicate one whole meeting to it as well and collaborate and then come out with something. That's always, productive if you want to have a work session. Technically, to the rules, I have to be the bad guy, but OMA is that, you can't be communicating on things you have decision power over. And that would be something that you would be choosing as a group to provide a correspondence, so.
Right, I figured I wanted to double check on that.
Yeah, no problem.
But if we did work on something and then during the public meeting, say, this is what we've come up with, and, then we vote on whether or not we want to advance it.
Yeah, absolutely. You can do that. All right, so do you want me to go over 138, kind of where we're at? Okay, so the plan, as we know it, is to reconstruct 138 from Route 2 all the way to Route 108. So that takes us from the intersection, which you see here, which is kind of near the turf farms. I'll dub it no man's land to some extent. They had recently reconstructed, they being RIDOT has recently reconstructed Route 2. It was a direct repave project. They added the center lane and kind of put it on a road diet when they've been doing this, where they put the center turn lane in much of that and paved it. There's no bike lanes, there's no sidewalks, there's nothing. So the question becomes, where, if we're going to start sidewalks, one of the things that we are going to ask throughout is share rows and share the road signs. I think that's reasonable. It's something they're doing more. I don't know if we have right of way here to create a whole separate bike lane, especially on both sides. But I do think we have room to potentially put a sidewalk from West Kingston Park all the way to the Fairgrounds Road Bridge. Currently, there's sidewalks that come off the bridge to the west on both sides where I have my pointer down the Blackbird Road. It's in rough shape. The north side's about 3 feet wide, and actually I'll see if I can do a street view here. 3 to 4 feet wide here, and it's not in great shape. And then on the opposite side of the road, it is a sidewalk that goes to no man's land. So our proposal would be to reconstruct this walkway, potentially widen it if we can. And then this walkway, it's a bigger ask, I will say, but connecting it all the way down to West Kingston Park. That would get the park connected to the train station, which would also connect to the village and on up. So that one I'm putting as a tier 2 task, because the strategy is we don't want to over ask, right? So we have like a tier 1, tier 2. Tier 1 is those connections we really, really want, right? We have to get the university, in our opinion, connected to the train station. We really want to reinforce pedestrian connections through the village. So those will be top tier tasks. That doesn't mean this is off the list. It's just, it kind of provides a little bit of what we consider a little bit of reasonableness to RIDOT as we make this request, in our opinion. So that'll be on the list. I'll continue down the roadway here. At the intersection, we're obviously asking for some improvements. One of them, improving the intersection with the crosswalks and having pedestrian signals at all the corners. In addition, I've asked, because it is close to the historic train station and the entranceway to West Kingston Village, to have decorative yard arms for the lights, the fluted poles, the black, which would be typical you'd see in historic districts and older villages. I believe the train station, correct me if I'm wrong, is the oldest operating train station in Rhode Island. So, and it certainly looks like it's got the Victorian detail and whatnot, so we would kind of want to celebrate it. It's the entrance to the village. So this intersection would be pedestrian signals. Any comments or questions?
Question for you. Going back to the sidewalks, but also addressing the sidewalks across the bridge.
Yep.
What width will the sidewalks be? Is it a single person wide?
So I've asked for, in my memo, a minimum of 5 feet to allow 2 people to pass. Right now, it's much less than that. As you can see here, I think it gets down to about 2 to 3 feet in some sections. It's not really appropriate. It's tight, especially given the fact that the breakdown, the fog line is right on the curb. So if anybody steps off of that, they're in the lane. So if they they're going to rebuild the bridge. We're suggesting they widen the bridge to accommodate a wider walkway on both sides.
And was the width of the bridge itself something that they had to get approved by Amtrak? So, and if it took consideration, again, look how narrow the sidewalks are on the existing bridge. Are they replicating the width, or are they widening the bridge to accommodate wider sidewalks?
So I can't comment on what Amtrak's requirement are. We're making an ask.
I'm saying, did the state work with Amtrak and get the specifics that would allow wider sidewalks? Do we know?
No, not that I'm aware of. I believe they're in the process of working with Amtrak. They don't have a design yet, right? They know they need to replace the bridge. And to be honest, I'm not quite sure what replacement includes. If that is a complete, they haven't gotten into, my understanding is it is a complete reconstruction, but they're going to do it in phases so they can always keep it lane open. Yeah. So they'll probably demo one side, reconstruct that side, move traffic, and move to the other. The question is what the finished product looks like, and I don't have a sense of that yet. So we're just making the ask of, in an ideal world, we would see 2 sidewalks, 5 feet-ish wide, to accommodate individuals passing on both sides.
So that's being put on, all right, that's put on the table for them to
From our
consider
memo,
with
yes.
it.
We're making the request. Now, they could come back and say, Amtrak says, no, we can't widen the bridge, at which point I think we'd have to look at, and this is all part of the design process, do we put all our eggs in one basket, maybe put sidewalk on one side of the road and make a much wider sidewalk and then have crossings where you can get over to that one side, or is it important to have it on that both sides? And I think that's an assessment we'll have to do at a later point if we
And
get there.
looking at the image that you presently have, there is I'll call it a buffer zone leading up to the bridge there. Is that the bridge proper that includes it as well? So they could take away from the middle for traffic and perhaps keep wider sidewalks.
In my opinion, yes, but, I'm not a traffic
them.
engineer either, so. Like I said, we'll make the ask. They have engineers working on this, so I'm
Okay.
sure they can figure it out, or what they can and can't do. Again, I don't have a sense, too, of, how wide even the right-of-ways are. I'm looking at the poles, which typically indicate that that would be in the right-of-way, but to what extent, I don't know. So we're making asks that would be an ideal situation.
All right.
We can ask for bike lanes on both sides and sidewalks on both sides. They may say, well, listen, we don't have physical right-of-way to even accommodate that, so. Moving down the roadway, did you have something, Dorothy?
I did. I just wanted, when you're speaking of the memo that you're going to send them, when can we get a copy of that so that we're not asking for things? We want to try to support what you're asking.
Sure, yeah,
So-
once I have it prepared.
Okay.
So my intent is I'm going to be continuing to work on the draft tomorrow, and potentially over the weekend to get it out early next week. So when I send it, I'll send it to all of you. I'll just CC you on it, or I'll just send it individually to make sure that you all have an understanding of what the contents are. So moving down, there are sidewalks on both sides right now, heading down to the roadways that lead to the train station, and then they continue on in the West Kingston Village. The interesting thing is on the north side, they end at a residence and they kind of just terminate. And I don't know why that decision was made, probably money and just, lack of effort maybe. On the other side, they did at least have some reasonable terminus because it goes down to the post office and there's a crosswalk going over to the Courthouse Center for the Arts. It leads you into a drainage ditch, so I'm not sure why that particular location. So in the memo that we're preparing, we requested sidewalks on both sides. I feel there's adequate right-of-way to accommodate sidewalks on both sides, and redo this intersection in this area because I do think the linkage between post office and the courthouse is important. Whether this crossing has to be here, that's another story. I think that this could be shifted. There's no curbing that goes across the front of the post office, so it's a little bit of a free-for-all pulling in there. There's a little bit of a piece there. But you can tell it's been mounted once or twice, and people don't really respect that. So I think defining this is also an opportunity maybe to put some trees in here or plantings, and kind of define the space. So our suggestion is all the way down, sidewalks on both sides, rebuild this crossing with RRFBs, very similar to, I saw the image today, the North Kingstown project where they added them, and reinforce this with some type of consistent, visible color. The question comes in whether, this is kind of an old style striping, whether we want to create something a little bit more consistent in our villages, kind of like they did on High Street with the stamped brick, and doing that with the lines. It's a little bit more visible, and we are trying to, again, celebrate a little bit of the history, which is I'm trying to bring in some of this. As a tier 2 in the village, we're asking for decorative lighting. So that's a big ask typically with RIDOT because Cobra head style lighting is cheap. You can kind of see here that, I think that's one, on the pole with the arm. That's your typical Cobra head light. So there'll be 2 requests. First is, can you put in decorative lights? That would be more of a post-op decorative style fixture. If you can't do that, can you put in the infrastructure and conduit to afford it in the future should the town want to undertake it or we get future grant funds? We at least have the infrastructure under the sidewalk to accommodate it. The other add to that would be that, even if you install that infrastructure, we'd still like to see potentially those Cobra heads be built into a little bit more decorative fixture. So they do make Cobra heads that don't look like your standard Cobra head, something that's a little bit more architecturally significant, but it's not, it's not going to pull off the post tops or, that you see in some of the more historic villages.
As we've seen
Questions?
in other streets, have they only placed the overheads like they have now at the points of intersection? There's a street that intersects right where that overhead is, just east of the post office. It seems to me that often that lighting occurs
For the lighting.
just when there is a street intersecting.
This particular roadway, so you see
Oh,
one here.
there's one right at the post
Yep.
office with the
Yeah,
entrance.
I do believe, and I travel this almost every day. Of course, heaven forbid I actually pay attention. There's one here. So it does look like through the village itself that they
Okay.
have a pretty consistent pattern of pretty much every other pole of having a Cobra head.
Right, thank you.
Yeah. So,
Are there any plans for those electrical lines to get put underground?
no. And I will tell you, I am not even addressing that because I know the answer is no, and I'm not trying to be, this is what probably we can do, what we can't do. Underground is extremely expensive, and the tone I get from this project is, this is a reconstruction, close to a reconstruction in place. We're trying to move the needle to more than that, but having asked for many other projects in the past, it is extremely expensive. We'd be talking, you could spend 10 to 15 million just on utility infrastructure burying.
Does, through ARPA, I know that we did West Kingston as a kind of a sense of place. We had I think there was a sign that was, for each of the areas in that ARPA plan, they each had a different look. Are those being considered? Are those being shared? And I don't know that any of that matches with any of the lighting, or those are probably things that we would do separate, as long as they can be added at some point.
No, I think it's a good point. I did take a look at the West and Sampson plan for this. Unfortunately, the focus was more on, there was a park development over the signal tower that they're proposing, which, whether that's a reasonable, I think that would more a town thing for future. They didn't have a lot on the roadway. They did have signage, but I do think that is a good point. Now, I can put that in there. I think an identification sign at a minimum would be a tier 1. I also think that wayfinding, especially given, I'm trying to tie our request also to the train station. We have a great opportunity here. We have the largest university in the state, proximate to a railroad station, which is going to have a major RIPTA hub, which is also connected to a bike path. So we have just like Warwick does and just like Pawtucket has, we have a true intermodal connectivity. The only thing they have in Warwick is an airport, but the one thing we have that they don't have is a directly connected bike path. So really trying to connect that. So I do think putting in wayfinding sign is a reasonable request, given that, especially from the university to the railroad station, and maybe, promoting that it be more historically accurate. So I'll put that in.
And I know that when we talked with Ella Ackerman about the hub, that was one of the pieces that she did include, was that people have to have a way to get to the hub. They need to walk there. And there were some things, I believe, in her plan that went beyond just down at the hub area. I think it might have come up to the sidewalk that joined 138. I think that we should have something on that. So, that's another, RIPTA has suggested that this be done. So that's another little element that perhaps RIDOT would be interested in.
I would hope so.
Oh, good. So, okay, all righty.
I agree. We'll just leave it at that. All right, so we talked about sidewalks, we talked about lighting, we talked about the crosswalk at the Center for the Arts. In addition, we'll be asking for street trees where reasonable within the right-of-ways, where it makes sense, right? So, this, unfortunately, there was some substantial trees that were recently taken out a little bit further down the roadway towards Plains Road, in front of some of the houses here. They're, I would say, probably 30-plus inch in caliber, and they were unfortunately taken out. I believe they were on private property, so obviously I'd be looking for something within the right-of-way. And again, you can picture the look with this being curbed out and actually defined. And there's enough room in the right-of-way to create some green space where we could do some planting. That would be the goal. The other place that I've asked, in which there isn't a current crossing because there's no sidewalk, is at the convenience store. If you can picture sidewalks on both sides going down the roadway, it would seem to make sense to bring them over and have a connection if they're on this side to get them over to the convenience store. There's not a lot of amenities in this village. That is one that I could see people walking to. They're in the coffee shop, right? So on the flip side, if they're on the north side of the road, they can cross over and walk down to TLC Coffee Roasters here, or they can, from the south side, move north. The request is the same as the other one. Our RRFBs have a very, consistent sidewalk treatment. Moving further down, it gets a little bit more restrictive to have two sidewalks. So as we approach the bridge narrows, and you can see the width of this. I don't believe they're intending to completely reconstruct that bridge. They didn't address it. So it leads me to think that they're keeping that bridge in place. They're going to repave over it. If that's the case, then I do believe that we're asking for a sidewalk on one side and put a crossing at, I believe this is Liberty Lane. At this Liberty Lane, have a crossing that would come over. So if you're on this side, you could cross and then go on the northbound side to get to a sidewalk that would take you to Plains Road. So that way, at Plains Road, you can go up into the university going there, or you can continue on. From this point, we're only asking for one sidewalk until we get further up the road. So two sidewalks to this location, one sidewalk from the Chepuxet River heading east to the university. Because as you get down to Plains Road, it becomes kind of desolate. There's a cemetery, there's not a lot to connect to. You're moving up towards a bike path. In addition, I've mentioned, I think I'm going to have a broad request in the memo for the Sharrows and to share the road. In addition, if they can accommodate a bike lane on one side, by all means do it. That's kind of the tone I'm setting. Like, if you have room within the right-of-way to accommodate a bike lane in addition to that sidewalk, do it. If you don't, provide accommodation or at least stripe it as such. Does that make sense?
So you're saying stop the sidewalk, the north side sidewalk at Plains Road, and not continue beyond that where you have the old cemetery further east?
Nope, it would continue on.
All
So
the
the
way to
sidewalk,
you,
would-
just
I'm
north
just saying
side.
that the two sidewalks would stop before the Chepuxet River Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
The northbound sidewalk would continue on all the way up to essentially Upper College Road from here. So we're requesting a new sidewalk be added from Plains Road to connect to the existing sidewalk, which starts, I believe, in the general vicinity of Keeney.
And some sort of a crosswalk at the ending of the south side of the road. Could you pivot back to the area in front of
so
TLC Coffee?
Because that second sidewalk would end, let's say at Liberty Lane,
Yeah.
there would be a crossing that would come across. This is a logical crossing point,
Are you
right?
requesting a flashing beacon at that point because traffic coming from west to east has a curve and
Correct.
will not see pedestrians crossing?
So that's correct, and that's something that the engineers would have to work out, whether that's most appropriate to come to the other side of Liberty Lane, near where the parking area is for the Great Swamp, and make the crossing there, because it's further away from the intersection, but we would request on all of ours to include the RRFBs. So essentially, all my discussions on any of the mid-block crossings would be RRFB high-visibility crosswalks, and that would be one of them. So that would take them from the southbound side to the northbound side, where they could continue on all the way up to Upper College Road.
Mm-hmm.
Have you considered something that would look more like the bike path, an off-road instead of a sidewalk, to have something, because if it's going to keep going up past Plains, it is going to join the bike path instead of it having the look. I mean, you could almost, from Liberty, a lot of people might leave the bike path and they go up to TLC, okay? And then it almost seems like if you're going to make a change there from sidewalks on both sides, that maybe you consider a wider, kind of more of a bike path, just on one side.
So I'm talking sidewalk on the northbound. Are you saying on the southbound side have a bike lane?
I was thinking a kind of an off-road instead of a sidewalk, make it more like a bike path that will join the bike path that crosses 138, because you're gonna have some off-road treatment. Either it's going to be a sidewalk or something else, and it might make more sense to just have something that's going to line up and look like it matches.
But if that is done, do you have the risk then of thinking a sidewalk will accommodate the pedestrians walking from the university? There are a lot of people who walk the bike path there. And if you want the students walking and getting to Taylor Landing, which they frequent fairly well, that you may have some ADA issues if you convert to a bike path there versus keeping the standards for a sidewalk.
Are you thinking that students are going to come down Plains?
The bike path.
The bike path. Are you talking about the bike path that crosses 138?
Where the bike path crosses 138, there are
Okay.
students who walk from where the softball, baseball
Right.
fields are, use the bike path, and use the rest of the bike path as a walking area. But if you're providing the sidewalk that leads over to where Taylor Landing is and those other shops, the students would be able to walk to there as well. But my concern is if you make it just a bike path, do you have an issue with disconnect on the Americans with Disabilities Act, that you have a certain standard for sidewalks that you wouldn't have for a bike path? Well, I have it on, it's just,
It was red.
okay.
I'm just trying to...
Oh, I didn't
So-
realize it wasn't coming through.
We can certainly look at it either way. I will say this, RIDOT had already set the tone of they're moving towards a sidewalk, and URI was on board with that. I believe they kind of felt value in that. Now, I will say that Plains Road doesn't have any sidewalks either. So, but that doesn't mean they don't walk it, and it also doesn't mean that the bike path also isn't there. I hear you. I do see a lot of pedestrian, walkers. I think the strategy we're taking is bikes can share the road, right? They can. And it's not a long distance. It's fairly short. I know that can be a high-speed area as well, and it's got some curves, so it's not the safest thing in the world. Our strategy was sidewalk on one side. If right-of-way accommodates on the other side, accommodate a bike lane. And it may not be the widest bike lane, but there would be a separated bike lane similar like Old Tower Hill Road, where you have a separated lane 4 or 5 feet that's designated as such.
Single direction, though?
It's only single direction, so that's part of it. It's always a toss-up. I will say this: if push comes to shove, because sidewalks are expensive, probably more expensive than overpaving the road and just putting down some striping. Maybe that's our second. But it seemed like in the mindset of where we're at right now, they're of understanding at least to have a sidewalk from this area all the way to Upper College Road on the northbound side. So I almost don't want to dissuade them from doing that, because I think it's a pretty good deal. But I appreciate the input. This intersection, I have not asked for decorative yard arms because there's no reason to. It's really not. I mean, it's part of the village, but Actually, no, did I? I'm sorry, I take that back. I may have, because it is part of the village. So, I'm sorry, I got confused. Keeney's the one I'm thinking of. I'll get into that in a second. This one, prospectively doing the yard arms, reconfiguration of some of the intersection. It's a very wide intersection. Trying to make it a little bit more pedestrian friendly. Again, pedestrian signals, crosswalks, etc.
Will that mean that they also now introduce at that intersection, since you're having sidewalks, a crossing, a pedestrian crossing, like go, don't go for the pedestrians?
Yeah, that's...
So, because I can see people coming out of URI off of Plains Road, not used to that.
Yeah, so that would be a more traditional pedestrian signal, so it'd be a go, no-go timed type event, more like a Dale Carlisle intersection where you'd have a four-way full stop.
So is that is anticipated to be there for
That's
that
our
busy
request.
intersection?
We think it's logical, given the university's right there and the amount of traffic.
Yeah.
So that's our request.
Okay.
Yep. This is where we'd have the northbound sidewalk. You can see the width of the right-of-way. They will have some challenges. There are some dips through here. The northbound side's probably not perfect all the way through, but neither is the south end portions. I think the idea in keeping it on the north is we're keeping it consistently on the university side. So, but you can see the distance here, and there may be opportunity, depending on how much the right-of-way extends, to get that lane width up to at least get that one bike lane in.
Is RIDOT thinking of purchasing any more land to widen the right-of-way at all at any point in time with this project?
They have not informed us of any type of purchase. I would say that typically those purchases are done more for, they have to meet certain drainage requirements, and sometimes they can't because they're adding, like big consideration that used to not be considered is every time you add a sidewalk, you add impervious area. So, unless the roadway's overpaved. So their consent decree with Rhode Island DEM says that they can't increase the runoff. You know, they can't increase the pavement without offsetting that in some way. Oftentimes, and this was discussed on Old North Road, is that they can't find area to do that. So sometimes they go to other areas to do it. Sometimes they purchase property to do it. So I'm only saying that because it is a consideration even on this project where they're going to have to manage that stormwater. We're adding a lot of extra pavement prospectively. So and that also adds to the cost of the project. So for every linear foot of additional we request, that's probably what's running through their mind as well. It's not just the cost of the pavement. So as we approach the Xing, we have the famous hawk light here. I am interested in your input here because my current recommendation is to move towards more of a traditional RRFB versus the hawk light. I've personally found, I drive it every day, that, and I'm not saying I'm the only case, I've seen people go right through it because they don't really understand it, and we've heard a lot of comments like that because a lot of people don't understand how that works versus a traditional light. I don't know what your experience is. Feel free to chime in.
I'm with the RRFB.
Same, I'm on that all the time, and I'll sit there on my bike and just wait for the traffic to clear so I don't have to hit the button and wait for it to, for everybody to stop. And I know that I should be hitting the button, waiting for, the sign to tell me to go across, but I'm thoughtful of the traffic, so I don't want to have people stop, if they don't have to, just for me to bike across. So, but I like the other better.
One of the things I did consider asking for as well, and this is also something we could talk about, is more of a traditional stoplight on a post and having a standard pedestrian signal. The one downside of that is it gives the impression to the bicyclist or pedestrian that people are going to stop. And unfortunately, this is at the bottom of that hill where people have come around, and, you know, it kind of gives a sense of security to people crossing. They don't always look if people are actually fully stopped or stopping. So at least with the RFB, it's flashing. They know it's not a stop, so both are on their kind of best behavior of looking at each other and saying, okay, you know, are you good? And we could also add, you know, we do have the flags, which seem to have been successful throughout town, if people use them. So we could add those as well. All right, moving up. So one big difference in this roadway is going to be that Keeney, to my knowledge, what they expressed is that, am I Keeney? No, that's not Keeney. It's the wrong intersection. Let's go further. Sorry if I'm giving you a headache.
And we're still talking about the sidewalk only on the north side.
Correct. So at this point, you can see the URI Keeney Gymnasium, the large electronic sign. The sidewalk would come on the northbound side. This intersection, based on the traffic counts, RIDOT has said that it met the warrant for a light, a standard traffic light. So this one would have a standard traffic light with crossings. So this is a point now, obviously, where there's no place to cross to here, so we would just be looking at a crossing across Keeney Road, and then that would continue on. So that could be a standard pedestrian signal, and then it would move on from there.
And it's actually going to be a traffic light. When a couple hundred yards further, you have the Graduate Village
Yep.
light as well.
So that's another point of discussion, right? But yes, you have Graduate Village. I think where it really meets the warrant, obviously, is special events. So, you know, you go by there on an average day, not many cars are moving out. But when any type of event happens there, it can be a hot mess quick. So I think that's what they're looking at. And I'm pretty sure that they'll be looking at a light similar to Plains Road, where the police can control it for events, where they can bring people out in, you know, and hold one lane of traffic up. So I think that's where they're coming from that. Now, obviously, this would prospectively be realigned as part of that, because there's a pretty wide sort of curve into the facility. So we requested much the same, safe pedestrian crossing. This would continue up. There is another bridge and there is another crossing kind of mid-block here to Peckham Farm. On that one, this is a point where I'm you know, again, we're kind of internally, the easy ask is, hey, make the existing crosswalk visible and put in an RRFB. The question becomes, to your point, Neil, is not far up is Graduate Village. So, you know, we could potentially consolidate these. However, I also know the pattern of walking and the chances of somebody, you know, kind of doing loops. Like we looked at, you know, would it be feasible to do a sidewalk on both sides in certain portions? What I came out with is make this safer, you know, do the RRFB. If people are going over Peckham, you know, enforce that. I believe there's a cut-through walk here. And so maybe better connect and reinforce this crossing.
I'd be curious about the volume of pedestrian crossing to Peckham.
So would I. I don't think I've ever seen anybody cross there. I don't know how strong the linkage is pedestrian-wise to Peckham. You know, it's a pretty good walk to get into the farm. So the other option is we say, you know, we don't see a need for it, you know.
It looks to me that it was an old crossing that predated the existing of the bike path, which would get you to Peckham.
You know, honestly, as I look at it, and I'm just thinking about it now, probably a safer crossing would be to put it at the signalized intersection now and recommend they do a small sidewalk up.
Yeah.
And then just end it and then get rid of this.
Agreed.
Does that make sense? So we're designing on the fly here, but I think it would make much more sense and consolidate. Because mid-block crossings, and Rich will say this as well, we're not a big fan of them. We understand they need to happen, but you do try to limit them because eventually people don't pay attention to them. So let's go up to the other hawk light, which is shown here, yep, at Graduate Village. So this is another intersection, and I've really seen people blow through this one because they're coming down the hill, and people really don't think to slow down. This is also gets congested, as we all know. So again, I think, there's the option would be the RFB here and keep it as diligence on both sides. Does everyone agree with that strategy? Okay. So there's a sidewalk that extends up on the northbound side now. Some of this is on URI property. I don't know how RIDOT's going to continue to view this. There's existing vegetation there. As you can see, the tree here. So if they were to try to butt up to the roadway and do a more traditional arrangement, it would definitely make an impact. URI has, Ken specifically has offered and others to, continue to let them use URI property to extend the sidewalk. I believe they'll take them up on that offer and try to use the format that they have now, but they didn't commit to anything. Essentially, what they've said is they want to maintain a sidewalk on that north side, which seems to make the most sense. They did entertain an option to move it to the south side, but it really doesn't make sense. It's mostly residential on this side. It's pretty far between residential roadways. There are a couple inlet roadways, with exception of Biscuit City Road, which is further up. So as you get to Upper College Road, that's not Upper College.
But the section that you were just talking about would make sense for them to improve the existing sidewalk that's on the north side of the road, because it would be consistent with what you just mentioned about impermeable surfaces. They're replacing, they're not adding.
Correct. Yes. So we have Lower College Road. It's been a while since I went to the university. So Lower College Road, and in this general vicinity is Biscuit City Road. So this would prospectively continue on the north side. Sidewalk would move up to Upper College Road. There's some logistics to that, as you can see. Now, how they shift the walkways and whatnot, and I don't know if they can shift the poles either. That is a possibility. But what we've asked for is from Biscuit City Road, which already has a sidewalk, to continue that going up and rebuild it. It's gotten worse since we did the sewer reconstruction. I think with the piping being there and everything, it's pretty bad.
It's a washboard.
Yeah, and we know that.
And is there a time frame for them to repair the temporary paving? Are we looking at, they're waiting until they do the project about a year and a half out?
I don't have a firm answer on when. I have the same question, and I need to talk to Rich about that. I know that typically they allow it to settle over the winter, and I know that there was a little bit of hesitancy because of this project. There was some back and forth on, does it make sense for us to do a curb-to-curb repaving now that you have this project on the boards? Essentially, the answer we got back is yes, because between the bridge being done and the amount of work and design effort, we could be years out, right? We could be 3-4 years out on a project. We don't want to wait 3 or 4 years for that to be smooth pavement. So I know that Rich was moving in a direction to authorizing the contractor to pave it curb to curb as part of the project. I just don't know when that's going to happen. So I can get back on that.
Yeah, it made me wonder if the state has standards for temporary paving. That was such a poor job. And then who inspects it? It's just so bad.
It's town inspected. They're required to keep it in reasonably good condition. I will say it's, because I drive it every day myself, it moves, and that's what the intent is. They buried the line, they pave it, and they allow it to settle. And that's why they don't pave it immediately. So it has moved. Actually, there's a dip that just keeps reoccurring. Every couple of weeks it gets deeper, and then they come in and they pave it again, and it sinks. So I don't know if he's just waiting for it to ensure that it's settled out. I'm sure we're all anxious. I would prospect that Rich might be waiting now that college is over and traffic might be a little bit lighter. Of course, we have beach traffic too, but trying to get in there and do it, so
Just skip
I'll
the-
follow up.
Skip the Jazz Festival and Folk Festival weekend, too.
Right.
But,
There's always something. Repaving will be fairly quick, though.
So
on something
that
like
should be
this.
expected to be in the near term, that
Yes.
will be repaired?
Yeah,
'Cause
I'll get
I
it.
assume you, like I, like everybody else, are driving right up on the right-hand curb
Yep.
to avoid that work?
Yep, I'm right there with everybody else.
Okay.
At least we can do that, right? So this sidewalk, obviously, so at this point, we'd have two sidewalks. This one ideally widened and corrected, the curb line corrected. It's been some time. And as we all know, you get up to Upper College Road and there's some logistical challenges. So as the sidewalk comes up in front of the South County History Center, which I actually had the opportunity to visit last week with Erica Luke, it's fantastic. If you haven't been in there, go. They have a great new exhibit on women in SK. There's my little soapbox for the night. So as we get into this, the question becomes, I've, in the memo, asked them to explore this side of seeing if they can, instead of trying to go up, you see the amount of room within this lane, of trying to look at the lane and seeing if they can tuck in an appropriate sidewalk as far as they can up until they get to the church. At this point, it collapses and there's not a lot of opportunity to get in, plus you start parking. So at some point, but ideally you'd get up to this crossing, right? You want to get to Upper College Road to a safe crossing. So the sidewalk ideally would extend all the way up without having to go up onto the wall as it does now and get to this critical juncture point. Again, there's some hurdles to that. Anytime you have a hurdle, you have more money challenges. There's the stone walls that are out there, some of which are historic. So they're going to have to work through that equation. We'll continue to work with them. There's what they can do and what they can't do, but we're requesting that they try to bridge that gap.
I'm going to say about 25 years ago, DOT set the specifications for that wall in front of the church. You know how it slopes a little bit, that lower section when that was put in there? The state, when they were doing the wall repair work back then, mandated that they put that slight pitched angle at the bottom that you see, the lower two courses of stones. I knew the individual who was at the church who was tasked with the stone wall repair, and he got blasted by the members of the congregation because of what it looked like afterwards. But the state mandated that it have that pitch back then.
Was it to reinforce the wall? That's what it looks like. It wasn't for
That's what you
pedestrian.
think it was, to reinforce it with traffic and plowing, but it just, they did require that feature be put in. Before that, it was straight up and down. Now, they have the issue there, again, you've got a crossing to the church that faces a stone wall. And again, how do they address ADA? Because anybody who wants to cross 138 effectively has to go up to South Road rather than cross there.
Yeah, I don't disagree. It's a difficult
problem.
sort of intersection. If they're to do it right, you need to move some of the configuration there. You have to change the geometry. So to what level they're willing to do that within their budget, I don't know. We're requesting that they look at it and try as hard as possible to reconfigure that so it's a suitable crossing, to your point, for ADA. And in addition, make it a bit safer there, because there's so many lines on the pavement, right? And anytime you have that, it just creates a bit of confusion out there on what's going on.
Oh, and the activity for strollers, because the library is right there, and the small children hours and gatherings at the library is an issue. But it really tends to push access if somebody's going to cross 138 down to South Road, which we've already discussed the issues, and they have plans for that. Are those plans or are we stopping here at Upper College, or are we going up to South Road?
No, it's going all the way to 108. So
Okay.
at this intersection, again, we've decorative yard arms, a little bit, nicer. It is a historic district. It is our only designated historic district in town, under the auspice of HTC, as you know. So we're looking to get an upgrade here as opposed to going with the guy wires, get those fluted poles and looking a little bit better. At this point, it transitions on the north side into more of a brick sidewalk. So that exists today. When asked about that, we got a little bit of a dodgy answer on like, okay, so what are you doing from Upper College Road to 108? Definitely repaving the road. As far as what to do on the sidewalks, didn't get a clear answer. What we're asking for is to evaluate it and repair where necessary to improve accessibility. There's a couple missing sections, especially on that south side, so I'm just going to hang on the south side for a minute. As we get down the South Road, there's actually a missing portion right in front of this house, which transitions from brick to asphalt. So I'm asking for them to, for consistency purposes, to continue with the brick and bring it all the way to Old North Road. There's also our infamous crossing, which Dorothy has been successful in lobbying to get signage for this, which actually isn't reflected here. But it's still a problem, and I think we can all acknowledge that. So again, what I've asked for is them to really analyze this intersection in combination with Old North Road. At one point, they had talked about a major reconfiguration of these lanes and trying to almost tee it up at some point, like in the past. I think that got abandoned. It's you know, being a historic district and other things, it's gone by the wayside. We also have the infamous wishing well, which I'm sure the community wouldn't want to part with. The question is, right at this point, there is a sidewalk. There's a limited crossing, and then it kind of dives into this miniature sidewalk, and then essentially goes to nowhere. And then, as you can see, there's a lot of lines, breakdown area, and you can see how they've tried to, over time, control the traffic through that. I apologize, my screen's a little bit. So in front of Painted Karma, you have this wide right-of-way with no curbs, and actually you can see there's a drainage issue right there. So what I've asked for is they really take a hard look at this entire intersection. Would it make more sense, now putting on my old landscape architecture hat, of potentially going to like a stamped paving for the entire zone to really highlight that that node is a high-traffic pedestrian zone, and having appropriate crosswalks and bringing out curbs along these lines. Neil, as I know you know, and others may know, I believe that they're moving forward with a plan to put in the soft bollards along here. I don't think they put them in yet. Did you notice?
No.
To try to keep traffic from bypassing on the right as they approach this crossing lane. I would suspect that that is going to be potentially looked at as a long-term solution as well. I know it backs up traffic, or it could potentially back up traffic some, but there's a high hazard to that pedestrian by people going around. In addition, some of the traffic bottleneck there, you know, obviously it's at certain portions of the day. I think it's you know, there's a calculation of how much bypass can they even do, because I know from my own experience, you may have experienced this as well. You'll bypass, but the light at Upper College Road still backs up the traffic. So even though you bypassed, you got about another 20 feet, and then you're stalled, and then it backs up traffic anyway. So whether that bypass is critical to keeping the flow, I think that's a traffic analysis that the RIDOT's going to have to do. So I think what we're talking about is a readjustment of curbs, like look at that hard.
They have the plan, they have the conclusions as to what they'll do. They'll put those soft, upright strips to block off that section. I do anticipate severe backups on 138 and down 108 when that is done, because in past history, when cars have been parked in spots there, it backed up significantly, and I think they put that to prevent parking. But let's go for it for now. It's something that can be amended. The big proponent, the big element there is that they are going to put the rapid reflecting beacon at that crosswalk, so that persons who are trying to get from South Road and cross over, that is a key safety item at that, because again, people can't see around a car making that left-hand turn down to South Road, and numerous times have almost hit pedestrians. Actually, when I went to the Kingston Improvement Association meeting and spoke on behalf of this committee there. You know, both crossing it one way and crossing it the other way, I had the flag, and it was, and, you know, people had to come screeching stops to not hit you there, which I can kind of consider the flag as a safety device to hit a windshield with sometimes if they're coming through. But it's but those improvements are pending, and again, the time frame for that is, I assume, nearer, not delayed for the whole project.
I haven't gotten an update on that. I can talk to Chief Moynihan because, you know, and trying to get an update. It's interesting because a lot of times we just kind of get, it's very similar to what happened on Kingston Road over near Old Mountain. They just kind of showed up one day. And Rich sometimes gives a little bit of a heads up, but not much. So I'll try to get an update on that. I think our approach in the request is I'm keeping it very open. I'm not saying close off that lane, do this, do that. What I'm saying is evaluate the curb lines. There appears to be a large amount of pavement in this area. We have pedestrian conflicts and we've had issues in this area. We need to address it through a comprehensive strategy between Old North Road and South Road. Now, whatever that is, I think that's going to be a part of a discussion. But I do think that there's a lot of opportunity here to make it both look nicer and actually more functional.
And to
I have
reinforce
a thought,
it,
and I don't, you made this sort of you didn't say it outright, but I just, it's like, oh, what an interesting idea. What about stamped concrete, or like the stamped crosswalks that we've been talking about, but have it from the beginning of Old North Road to the end, that whole intersection to South Road, so that it looks like it is the beginning of a real walkable village. Just a thought.
That's exactly, I think, what I was
Is
trying
that
to
what you were
communicate. If
trying
that
to-
didn't come across, yeah.
Yeah.
So essentially, you know, you see it a lot in cities.
Yeah.
We'll do the whole intersection.
Like Portland.
Or a portion of the roadway. And the idea is you create a node that identifies as you come into that, there's a clear lane, you know, it's identifiable. There's a different surface texture, so it reads differently. And that with signage and curbing, you know, kind of necking down things and whatnot, if you can do it, it really does help slow the traffic and increase, you know, really make those pedestrian crossings more visible.
And that's really not that large of a stretch to go from Old North Road to Upper College Road, because that's all historic village, and we close it off for various events at different times. So just
Agree?
putting that out
Yeah.
there.
and your
And-
recommendation on the brick sidewalk in front of that house.
Yep.
And it just ties it together because the brick picks up again on the east side of Old North Road.
Yeah, and it's kind of strange that it's missing. I don't have the history on why. I don't know if it needed to be replaced and that was the cheapest solution, or they just, you know, I don't know why, but it does pick up. I've never, actually, until I really started looking at this closely, I never really realized it, but while we're asking, you know, why not make the missing connection?
I'm glad that you stepped up, Eric. We'd like to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, thanks. I was just, I want to reiterate the traffic calming, because no matter what you do, people go way too fast down that street. So anything we can do to try and calm that, sure, is appreciated. And then the other thing, my daughter was thinking about this when we were up on South Road trying to get across. And the way that the lights are timed up at Upper College Road, there's no break, right? So when traffic is heavy, the people heading east, right, they finish the light switches, everybody coming up off of Upper College Road, then fill all the gaps. So there's never a gap in the traffic if you're trying to cross that road. And so by timing the light a little better, create a little space, a little time, it'll create a block, at least some open space. You know what I mean? Yeah.
That's something I can definitely include is evaluating the timing at all those intersections.
Right.
I agree. I've been backed up there, and it's you know, it's kind of I'm not quite sure how they operate sometimes it seems random, but yeah, I think
Yeah,
it makes sense that as part of this.
It
they should
just,
analyze it.
yeah, I mean, you get stopped on 138, it automatically switches to your left-hand turning lane, and there's not enough time for anything to clear, and the folks who are making that left-hand turn, just speed up to get right on the tail of that car in front of them, so they're never, so if you're, like, there was one point I was coming west on 138, and there was a kid, he was like 6 years old, 7 years old, trying to cross the street. Nobody. I ended up, I was in the back seat of my wife's car. I got out, stopped traffic, so that this kid could cross. Because again, there's no break in the traffic with the light signals. So that's it.
Also, Luke, I wanted to mention that there is a sidewalk, a brick sidewalk, on the south side that goes from the church. Okay.
Yeah, there is, and that's kind of where I showed it, where the crossing, excuse me, I'm gonna give everyone a headache again. It does go to South Road, right? And then this is where it crosses and kind of then dies out. So that would be, there's real opportunity to strengthen the walkways on both sides of the road, and there's plenty of room to do it. So that is certainly something that we're encouraging them to look at on this. This whole reconfiguration from South Road to 108 really needs to be rethought. And I think that's where an engineer is going to come in and maybe prepare a couple different options for RIDOT and really say, okay, this is where we think this works. Because even if you look down here, that's not a real curb. That's somebody, I'm not sure how that evolved. That almost looks like it went with the house because it's just around that property, and you can see how it goes into the property. So I'm not sure if that was just done at some point, but I don't think that was a RIDOT thing. So continuing on, it does get tight with the fence and prospectively the property line. I'm assuming that's the property line. So being able to accommodate walkways on both sides may not be an option at that point. But I think as long as there's a logical crossing somewhere that's safe to get people across, then you could maybe keep with that one sidewalk option. Again, I don't have access to what the survey and the right-of-way is, so that'll be up to them. I would certainly encourage them to keep the sidewalks on both sides. That would be ideal.
This is a great opportunity for RIDOT to help make a true sense of place for the Kingston Village and their flagship university. It's one that should not be lost.
Agree?
Yeah, it's one block, but it really is a nice respite for people driving. It's a nice little section to go through, and it could be really lovely and slow people down, and it would be nice.
Especially in the fall, right? Always looks nice in the fall. So that, that essentially terminates us up to this intersection, which, it's just kind of the same story as reinforcing pedestrian connections across these major intersections and allowing people to get across. I mean, if this remains as the only sidewalk, then prospectively at some point people are going to need to cross over and get down to 108 Kingstown Road. So.
But there's no sidewalk on 108, correct?
So no, there is not.
So you may have an issue of proposing connectivity to something that's not there.
That's true. And, to that I always say, what you guys already know, is just because you don't have something there doesn't mean it's not used. Seen plenty of people, especially there's bus routes along there.
Yeah.
And walking up and down that roadway. It's like anything. You're building it in for the future. I'll point to maybe the Center for the Arts, where you have the crosswalk to the drainage ditch. Maybe that was some visionary saying, "Hey, someday they may actually build a sidewalk here." So, I think in the future we're going to continue to press for the improvements. Right? High Street was done with sidewalks, and that was a big win. You don't always get the wins, but I would say that this is another area where ideally we'd at least have some safe pedestrian connectivity. This continues from the university and actually connects East Farm to the university as well, so you can make that argument.
Is there any opportunity to go east of 108 at all to service those houses that are a little bit further down?
It was not, let's put it this way, it was not explained as a project. It was explained to us that it's ending at 108. So is there an opportunity? That would be up to them, but I would say, based on my conversations, probably not. At some point, you have to call it good.
I think they did the paving up to 108 from the east. So that's where that ended, and I don't think that there was any sidewalk treatment there.
And they just kept what they had. Yep. So just to summarize my very long kind of conversation here, the memo is intended to go out. Are you all in agreement with what I went through? Do you have any additional comments before I finish up the memo?
I think you did a great job. That's a lot more detailed, a lot more sidewalk than I'd even hoped for. So I think that sounds good, and I think that when we can get together as a group and look at what you have and then support what you have, and then if there are a couple little tweaks here and there, we can add those.
So just moving off of that topic, because I guess we're still on the topic of town updates, I'll keep, Dorothy, if you're okay, I'll give a couple very brief to finish this whole line up. The school project. So I just want to inform you that the school project is moving forward at our town council meeting on Monday. The design development drawings were approved for submission to the Rhode Island Department of Education. So what does that mean? That means that we're in stage 3. We have to do schematic design submissions, design development submissions, and then ultimately going right up to construction document. Design development's pretty progressed. That means we're at a stage of advanced documentation. We're moving pretty quickly to get bids out. And I would say that we'll be moving towards bids within the next month or so. So we will be seeing shovels prospectively in the ground by the end of summer to start with the temporary roadway and get the project going. We had a community input session on June 5th. I attended that session. There was some discussion on just general traffic issues. Paul Bannon was hired by the project architect to look at the impact of traffic on the school project. I was also involved in that process. Essentially, there's no net negative impact because we took a school that was originally built for twice the amount of students and we're reducing the amount of students. We've reduced already the amount of students, but we are improving the interior circulation. So it's much improved with regard to where the entrances and exits are, but also the internal traffic flow and how we're treating it. The parking will be much more organized. It'll be students will be encouraged to divide and conquer to the entranceways as opposed to what they do now. Everyone is bottlenecked on that north side Columbia Street outlet onto, coming from the student parking lot. So they get bottlenecked, they can't get out. So that'll be corrected. And one individual asked about the surrounding area to what you've also asked about. That what are we doing outside of the school project? And I iterated to that person that we will be working, which we will, internally to look at the connections in the entire area to include the intersection of School Street and Columbia, because that has come up, that width of that intersection. The goal would be to identify what enhancements need to be done in the area, so that way, as we repave Columbia Street and we look at other areas, we can either build it into our capital plan or make the pitch to council like now's the time to do it, if we have the funds available, right? Because I don't think, I made this point, nobody wants to see backhoes out there for 3 years and then all of a sudden start another project on a roadway right after. So ideally, we're kind of in unison. It's a little difficult because we want to wait until all the heavy trucks are off the roadway before we rebuild them. So school project is progressing. Stay tuned. If you have input, certainly speak with myself. I'm on the committee, or communicate with the committee.
Does that include River Street also, that whole intersection, the River Columbia School?
Yes, that whole
Mess.
Intersection, yes.
Somebody almost hit me there today.
Mess. That's a better term for it. Yeah. Neil?
Yeah, just, we've discussed it at prior meetings too. The students heading over to use Old Mountain Field for recreation, it looks as though the rapid reflecting beacon is going to be, the fixtures for it are at Church Street at this point in time, not at School Street.
Looks
That-
like it's kind of in the middle of both streets.
I saw where they have the build-outs on the new crosswalk there, that on each side of it, there are I'll call them the bolts that are embedded in the concrete for something to be put in there. So I'm assuming that is where the beacon's going, because there's nothing at School Street.
I'll have to check. I thought it was
The plans
this
we-
general area crossing.
Where? It's,
So this it's School Street's here, but there is never a crossing right at School Street. It actually goes up towards the second entry, and I believe they rebuilt this a little bit closer to where the entrance is, and they put the bump outs. So I was under my impression that this
Look at
was
Church
gonna
Street. I think that's where they've installed it.
be- Oh, what? Further up.
Right there at Church, and if you take the drive-by and look, that's, to me, there's nothing built at the other one that I noticed. I saw it at Church Street.
I'll have to,
I thought I saw stuff at the other one.
You saw it at the other one?
yeah, it was my impression that they
Okay.
were doing it at both, but, and maybe one's in, one's
And
not.
that's the
but
one where you're going to have the new
I'll
entrance
check.
into the park.
What's that?
And that's the spot where there's going to be the new drive-in entrance to Old Mountain Field. is
Prospectively,
considered,
yeah.
prospectively.
Long-term,
Yeah.
the master plan calls for, it suggests that maybe opening it up again for vehicular traffic. We haven't gotten that far. Our current phase of the Old Mountain project is primarily the concession stand, the seating, and the surrounding field area,
Okay.
and some of the parking. That's about a $4 million project, and that's what we had. Actually, we didn't even have that. We've tapped every resource we could to get that project.
I'm just bringing that up in conjunction with the school as far as the crossing, that the installation is occurring there.
Yeah, fair, and, that's a good point. I mean, I'm personally happy to see something being done, and we expect that stretch of roadway is going to be paved soon as well.
If it's at the one that you're thinking of, that would make more sense because it's going to be closer to the new school. The other one at Church Street is where the existing school is closer to.
Correct. I will point out that on the plan, and I won't waste time trying to pull it up,
Yeah.
but essentially the entire school area is going to be a field under the new plan. Kimball Street will remain open for pedestrian traffic, so if they are coming down Church, they can come in. Under the base bid, under what we're including in the project, there is a walkway that's going to extend from Kimball down to past the parking area to the school. So that is going to be in the project scope. As an ad alternate, we've also included a track that would go entirely around the field and come back out on the other side, in addition to a walkway that would come off of Columbia. There's an entrance that's going to be here, and it kind of snakes down to the new parking area in the lower corner. So
Okay.
we're trying to build some connections on the other side regardless, because there may be those students who want to just take the alternate route.
All right.
But yeah, point taken, they're coming from different areas. So that's that with the school. That is the singular biggest town project built, probably in its history, money-wise. So just trying to keep you involved in that. And then also just to let you know that working with the Wakefield Village Association, I know you had that on the agenda, pretty closely with Rebecca Cook and Jen and that whole group on River Fire. I'm actually personally donating my time to build some planter hooks for the bridge and try to, make this area look nice with some pedestrian lighting and stuff. So that's my little side project. But it's a good group, and it just tying into these big events, it's good to just keep a lookout if you go, take notes, because as you walk Main Street and you look at the surrounding area, it's always nice to get feedback on, here's kind of what I'm seeing out there, especially during these programmed events. I'm working closely with WVA because they're focused more on programming now. And so they're trying to get things like River Fire, which has been a thing for a while, but bolster it, like make it better. And then add on new, they're talking about a Winterfest that could occur. So all that requires the type of infrastructure we talk about, right? And a lot of it's walkable. So we're making sure that, you know, that's in place, and if there's additional things we can add, we're doing it. We just replaced all the railings on the River Walk Bridge. They were all refurbished, and then we replaced some of the fencing. There's some new seating going on out there. So again, the pavement's looking a little rough, so I think it's something we're going to have to address in the capital plan, but some good stuff going on that's kind of in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, I spoke with Rebecca this afternoon, and so I think we're going to send a representative, either myself or somebody else from BPAC, to their next meeting in July.
I'll shut up now. I'm done. Unless it's something you specifically want to hear of.
That's okay, but that was all good. Luke, you can keep talking about sidewalks, you know, improvements. So, I'm, you know, looking at, I don't know if we can quickly get through this, but I'm beginning to think that maybe what we'll do is we will, what would you think about maybe pushing this to our next meeting? It's 8 o'clock.
I would agree with that. Is there, unless somebody here has a need to speak on a certain, any certain subject that we have in the agenda, we can push everything off to the next meeting.
Does anybody have anything specific to the agenda that they want to speak to? We're talking about we've talked a little bit about the Safe Streets for All already, the STIP. I know that we wanted to make a little bit of headway in just coming up with some strategies for the escape plan, or I think that we've already talked about using the Block Island Sound Bikeway. I think that that's kind of the name that had been used before in making that kind of connection. So I know we wanted to talk about that, but I think that's a big discussion. So I think that we might want to move that to the next meeting. Does anybody, Josh, did you have anything that you wanted to?
No, nothing here. I guess just one comment quickly on going back to Green Hill. I was on Matunic Beach Road, which seems like a very similar road, and they have the feedback signs there. And traffic was moving very slow. I noticed, you know, and it starts at 35, then goes down to 25. So there's even more of a reason for drivers to think they should be going faster. So just a comment that maybe the feedback sign is a great idea over there, like the citizens of that area were, you know, fighting for. So that's it.
Hey, Dorothy, I did confirm it is on the agenda. Your correspondence is on the agenda. I wasn't sure if there was a separate correspondence directly from the Green Hill, but it's yours. So if you want to come on Monday night to speak to it or have another individual speak to it, there is a memo, I know, from the chief addressing some of the concerns and with some, you know, potential ways that we could go about addressing some of the improvements there. And I believe the feedback signs are in that memo as well. So if you're so inclined, show up on Monday.
Was the representative from Green Hill advised that it'll be on the agenda? Because I assumed.
I believe he was, because Jim spoke directly to him after the meeting and apologized, and I think that was a big impetus for having, you know, this separate meeting, was to address all the things that we didn't get to. So, but I'll check with the manager and make sure that, and the clerk, to ensure that he was advised.
Thank you.
Yep.
That sounds great. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
A motion to.
Go ahead.
A motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That's it. We're going to call it a day and let Luke get home.
Thank
Let us
you
all get home.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, I appreciate everybody, and thank you for coming, Eric.